Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 3 of 4 with Lumix, all about your marketing event strategy. I'm joined by Mark again. Hello Mark, how you doing?
Hi, Lawrence. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So just as a quick reminder, we're Lumix. We help global events teams increase their ROI to their event strategy through a mix of vetted suppliers at discounted rates, as well as all-in-one event planning, sourcing, and supplier management platform. And we're doing this podcast as like a real insight into how global events teams are planning their events. And we've got Mark, as I mentioned. But Mark, do you want to give a quick intro again about your experience in the events industry?
Of course. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I've spent my career in technology in companies like Microsoft, Adobe, and Cisco in global roles and regional roles. So I've been around the block in terms of marketing, so I know what works and what doesn't. And excited to be advising Lumix as they get into helping marketers reduce their costs, provide better experiences, and keep that compliance all well and up to date.
And a whole host of events that you did with Cisco and all of those, I'm sure. So that's why we've got you here. That's why we're keen for your insight. And this week we're kind of going on a bit of an arc with our episodes. We talked about like how do you know whether you should be doing events and forming them as part of your strategy. Last time out we spoke about ROI and working with finance teams. And this week we're kind of continuing that thread of the other teams involved in putting on your event strategy. So my first question to get us underway, Mark, is like when you were planning all of those events at the companies you mentioned, who did you find yourself in the room with most frequently? Which teams were involved in that planning process?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, finance and procurement were key in doing those events beyond the marketing organization and, of course, sales, right? Goes without saying. But finance and procurement, and it was really interesting. A friend of mine I used to work with, John Watton, who's quite famous in marketing circles, he gave a few key tips which I think really resonated with me of how to work with finance and procurement, etc. So I'll just run you through those because I just read it yesterday on LinkedIn and I thought it was really good, exactly what I would think. So get ahead of the ask. So be proactive with finance and procurement. Don't wait for them to ask, right? Include them in your early stage planning there. Lead with KPIs, not with activity. Often marketers will say, I'm doing this and I'm doing this, and I hope to have this many people along. But more importantly, focus on what the return to the business will be. Thirdly, put the ta-da first, the exciting moment, so to get people's attention, and lead with the executive summary. I thought it was really good advice in working with finance and even anyone else, and even procurement, because if you can speak their language, you're going to get a lot more out of them. They'll become strategic partners as opposed to people checking, that you're spending correctly.
Well, I wanted to get into that kind of strategic partner element, but what did that Tadar, what do you think that Tadar moment, leading with Tadar, what does that mean, do you think?
It means, what is your big reason for doing the event, right? What is your key strategic imperative of running the event? And what impact do you think that's going to have on the business, right? From a brand, from a revenue point of view. So I think that's very important to talk to finance and procurement about that because often they'll think of these events as somewhat marketing fluff if you don't start with that.
Yeah, I've got little experience working with procurement teams, so you're going to have to validate a few of my kind of
Sure.
buzzwords here.
Okay.
Procurement, seen as the gatekeeper or the cost cutter, true or false?
True traditionally, unless you make them partners of marketing. Unless you look, I think in any interaction with anyone, you have to value people's expertise. The value of procurement is they can help you get a better deal, right, with suppliers than you might otherwise because they've been doing it for a long time and they've got comparisons points. They can keep you compliant. So,
Mm.
i.e., not spending money ahead of the quarter or parking money with vendors, etc., etc. All those things that I've experienced in my career and other people have experienced and they would rather have not experienced. So, procurement can really help with that. But if you don't engage them up front on your strategic planning, they will not feel part of the team and then they will be more police people to police what you're doing. And you want to try and avoid that.
How in reality did that timeline of events unfold? Say you've got a key event at the end of a quarter or a big annual one, and you're prepping T minus 6 months back. At what point are you looking to get procurement involved? Are they proactive in coming to you, or are you really having to work with them?
These, in my experience, these functions are never very proactive in coming to you. The marketing department needs to be proactive in going to them. And I would start off, even in your early planning, 6 months before, take both finance and procurement through your strategic plan for that event. Why are you doing it? What results you expect to get? What are the challenges you're facing, right? What help can they perhaps provide you? So I always think it's best to partner with people and include them in your challenges, because then they feel ownership and they'll help you out, because generally people are good people and they're wanting to help their colleagues and help the organization be more successful, but often they don't do it because they feel like they haven't been included up front and they're just asked at the last minute to clean up the mess, and that's not a good scenario.
Does that boil down to the nitty gritty of, say, I don't know, you've worked with an event supplier on a contract for 2 or 3 years, and then you've seen someone new in the industry who's bought this new tech, and you're like, oh, actually, these could be a real value add for the event this time round. Are you having to ask for procurement sign off to bring them in? Will procurement be saying, hey, Mark, have you seen this new supplier? Have you thought about bringing them into the event?
Can be both, depending on how proactive the procurement organization is. But it's all about building a trusted relationship, because that's what my teams and I were able to do. So when we came up with a new innovative supplier that wasn't a registered supplier with Cisco, for example, we would say to procurement, hey, this supplier is kick-ass. We really want to work with them. Can you prioritize this in putting them on our system and doing it quickly? And if you have a trusted relationship, they'll do that, right? There won't be so many questions about questioning you on it, because they'll have faith that you have the best interests of the company at heart and you've thought through the issues. Or you may even say to that procurement person, hey, I love this new supplier. The only one thing I'm concerned about is, this. Do they have the liquidity to do it? Can you check that out for me?
Yeah.
To give them a direction of what you need help with, right? Rather than just leaving it all open.
That one area I probably imagine where procurement might be a little more driver rather than, waiting for you to give them direction is on the sustainability and ESG front. I'm assuming
Yes.
that you saw over your career like this was no longer a nice to have and became like a top priority.
Absolutely. Particularly over the last 5 years, I would say, ESG's become critical, and companies are setting themselves targets of when to be carbon neutral, etc. And procurement plays a key role in that. So you're right, often they'll be proactive on that because they've got KPIs around that to ensure that any supplier, those companies I've worked with are dealing with, are helping in our carbon neutral stance.
Okay, so we've got our procurement team, key stakeholder in our kind of event execution. We spoke about finance teams last time, and we briefly mentioned them already. In our last episode, we kind of dialed down on the ROI specific
Yep.
communication with finance. But if events are similar to other conversations that we usually have with our friends in finance, I imagine the same applies in that they want a level of predictability. They come to you at the start of a financial year and they say, Mark, how many events are we planning? What's the cost associated with it? Can you forecast
Mhm.
the impact of all of these? Are these questions that you're usually getting on the events front too?
All the time, all the time. You're right. Finance wants it black and white. Unfortunately, the world is not fully black and white. If it was, every marketer would be running the whole organizations, right? If it became totally predictable, right? There's always some risk and there's always some chance in marketing, but you've got to minimize that risk and become as predictable as you possibly can. But you're never going to be as predictable as a P&L, right? That's very black and white. But I think the challenge for marketers is to take finance through the strategic plan. How many events are we planning for the year? What is our objective in running those events? What return do we expect to get? What sort of lifetime value are we driving for customers who are coming to those events? If we have any predictive stances, if a customer's come to more than 2 events, they're more likely to purchase more from us. if you've got stats like that, finance love that, right? Because then they can drill in on those KPIs and you can say, here's what I'm trying to move this cohort of customers from X to Y, and therefore, based on past experience, that will drive a 10% uplift in revenue, for example. Finance love that sort of discussion, particularly if they've been involved in the numbers, and then they're going to give you credibility with the CEO and the board, etc., when you're presenting. Because if you present something and someone questions you, if finance say, hey, I've reviewed this and these numbers are really good, tick in the box, no more questions, right? But if they don't, if finance says, I haven't reviewed it, I'm not sure, you fall into this trap of, can we really believe the data?
Where do you find you got most pushback when it came to like presenting that data to finance? Like, did they really critique those as best you could put together black and white numbers that you presented?
Yeah, sometimes they'd want it to be fully black and white, and I'd say, well, it's never going to be fully black and white. We can predict stuff and we can get 70% accuracy or 80% accuracy. But I'd put it back to them in the end and say, well, if you've got any other suggestions about how to make it black and white, I mean, the fact is you've got to involve people in this. This is a team sport, any of these things you work in. And my experience is when you put it back to finance to say, hey, if you've got any other suggestions about how to narrow that last 20% variability, but generally I asked that question and I didn't get very good answers, right? Because then finance realizes they're not really marketing experts either. And there's more to this marketing game than they might have imagined. Do you see what I mean? It's part of educating them on the challenges and the opportunities you're dealing with, because otherwise everyone's a marketing expert, okay? I've had experiences of CEOs saying, oh, my daughter doesn't like the ad, or my son likes the ad, or my wife likes the ad, or whatever. And I'd say, okay, well, that's very interesting. But, there's a focus group of one. But, we do our research and we've done our analysis and we've done our A/B testing and we're pretty sure this is the right approach. But you see, I've had that from finance, lots of people. But if you've got your data right, and if it's verifiable data, generally people will go along with you.
Well, I think we can definitely take that away as a little snippet, can't we? How everyone likes to think that. It's so relatable, isn't it? We're so subject to marketing day to day, so everyone feels like they can chip in, but there's a lot beneath the hood that necessarily people don't
Absolutely.
understand. I've got one more question on the finance front. It's coming to that kind of back to the budgets and predictability and forecasting, etc. If you set out with, we spoke in episode 1 about how much of a marketing budget you would distribute into your events schedule. How set in stone did you find that? You start the year with an X £1 million budget. How much did that vary and what did those conversations look like? Were you ever asked to reduce that based on
Well,
your first event going badly, or?
never, never. No, I'm joking. Every year I got, for the last, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, I got asked to reduce budget. Every year you're expected to get a better return on investment and become a more efficient marketing organization. That was just my experience in tech over the last 5 to 10 years. So you have to be ready for that. And you've got to show how you're making marketing more efficient every year. Okay. That's important, right? To improve that. But then you get to a point, once you've got your efficiencies, you need to be able to say to finance, okay, 20% cut. We're not going to be able to do these 8 events. We're only going to be able to do 6 events because I want to do these events well. I don't want to peanut butter stuff across and have a mediocre experience for customers. So we're only going to do 6. Therefore, that return on investment that I signed up for is going to be only 6/8 versus what I had there, right? And you understand that, right? Because you've got to come back to what is the return on the business. And I've had experiences where people say, oh, we want you to cut 20%. And I say, okay, here's the impact on the pipeline. And often they've said, oh, well, let's just cut by 10% or 5%. So they've walked it back a bit. And that's when marketers know that you have credibility with these other groups, because, if they reverse course based on your return on investment calculations, that's a good sign.
I can share the same feeling of, oh, can you just dial down budget usually, but can you also deliver the same amount of results with
Oh,
that?
exactly.
Well, I can try, but the reality is it's probably going to look like the 6/8 scenario you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a challenging one for marketers. I think we'll probably encounter it through our entire career, to be honest. That's just the
I
nature of
do
it.
as well, but I think the challenge is, Lawrence, is to show people that you're already making marketing more efficient each year to begin with, right? When you're pitching for budget for the year, you've got to show how you're becoming more efficient every year and that you're industry best practice, right? That's really important because, again, you show people that you're doing as well as anyone else in the industry. How can people argue with that, right?
It's tough to.
It's tough to. I mean, some people will, but it's pretty tough to argue with it.
Yeah. Good tips, Mark. Thanks. Conscious of time, we've talked about finance, we've talked about procurement, but there is one key stakeholder in putting events that without them, events wouldn't happen, and that is our suppliers, the suppliers that we choose and
Yep.
that we work with. My first thought here is whether you've had experience working with suppliers directly and or through agencies, and whether you have any kind of like pro con approach to going one way or the other.
Both. I've done agency and I've done directly because I've worked for large companies. So you sometimes have direct relationships with those events suppliers. And the best way I've found of working, particularly if you pick, if let's say you're working with, I don't know, 10 suppliers, okay, you should pick your two strategic suppliers and have a really strategic relationship with them. So you really trust them and they're involved as if they're an extension of your organization. So they're involved in your strategic planning. They get to know your team very well. You get to know their team very well. And I suppose the same is for an agency. If, let's say, someone is working with Lumix to help manage all their subcontractors in event marketing, you should treat Lumix as a strategic partner of yours and involve them in all that process. And I did the same with certain agencies. I mean, you can't do that with everyone, but if you've got a key agency who's managing these subcontractors, you want to make sure you're confident and they understand what you're on about and what you're trying to achieve, because then they're more feet on the street for you or more heads in your organization. And as you become more efficient in marketing, often headcount is under pressure. So it's incredibly valuable to have these suppliers who are strategic or event agencies who are strategic so that you can get more done.
What expectations would you have of a strategic supplier versus a non-strategic supplier? Like,
Sure. I would expect a strategic supplier to be giving you proactive suggestions about how to make the event better, how to do it more cost effectively, how to get a better return, how to improve the experience. Whereas a non strategic supplier is, I think the vendor is really telling them, or the agency is telling them, do this for this amount, right? It's really very instructive. Whereas a strategic supplier, it's a partnership. So you are bouncing ideas off each other and they're coming up with as many ideas as your team are.
how did you treat like the approach to pricing differently, like with a strategic supplier versus none, or was there no difference? It was a case of you were working with your procurement teams or whatever to try and get the best value at any point.
We try and get the best value at any point. I mean, generally, because the strategic suppliers, you're spending more money with them, okay? You still expect to get a really good deal because of the volume of dollars you're spending with them, right? Whereas a tactical supplier, you're spending less with them, but you still want to get a good return. So I don't think there's a big difference. It's just more, if you spend more dollars with a supplier, you'd expect to get a sharper deal. Do you see what I mean? Because if you're just a one off, they've got to cover their costs because that may be the only time they're working with your organization.
Yeah, and when it came to that deal, where did the responsibility lie? Was it marketing? Was that your procurement team driving that?
No, ultimately, in my experience, it's with marketing, but procurement plays a key role to help the CMO get the best deal and remain compliant and help them negotiate. But in the end, the CMO has to decide that this supplier is a great supplier for us because in the end, the CMO or the head of marketing is going to be held responsible by the CEO of how the event went. Was it a great experience? Did it pay a return on investment? Because let me tell you, if it doesn't work, who's going to be responsible? The head of marketing, not procurement.
I wonder, yeah. Um, Was there a point at which you found with suppliers that you were able to give them the economies of scale and that discount? Maybe a bit more granular of a question. Did you find that you had to do a certain number of events, put a certain amount of spend through them where they were more amenable to having that conversation? I'm interested to find out how you
Yes,
found that negotiation.
we even with some players we would pay them a retainer, right? Monthly retainer because we'd work out what we're going to spend with them in the year and we'd make an estimate of that, not to the 100% level of the spend, but maybe 50% of the spend. So that was great for them because they could be more predictable in their business. And it was really putting our money where our mouth was because we were saying, you're a strategic partner of ours. If you're saying to someone you're a strategic partner, you don't want them to be having business challenges and cash flow challenges in being a strategic partner with you because they're not going to do their best work if they have to do that. So, not doing it with everyone, but with your strategic partners, treat them like a strategic partner. Treat them like they're an extension of your organization. And if they were, you'd give them a more predictable cash flow, for example, or whatever's important to them. Ask them the question.
I think that's probably even more true in the events industry because I think from my experience, the terms, the conditions, the back and forth, the event, like when are you paid? Supplier A will have one contract where they like to get upfront payment of X versus supplier B, which is, happy to receive it all after, it's so hit and miss. And
Yes.
it's hard on the supplier side, they struggle with that cash flow in some instances. So being able to offer that retainer and regularity, I assume would have the supplier being like, yes, we want to be a strategic partner with you.
Yes, and they'll put their best people. They'll put the best people on your work. They'll be more creative. They're slightly more relaxed because that allows them to be more creative, right? If you're worried about whether your firm is going to be viable next month, it's kind of hard to do your best work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I think I'd like to wrap up with one question about we've touched on it in different areas, and I guess it's bringing it full circle. But if you take your event strategy, 6 events that you're doing every year, and the teams that we have talked about working with, like what's your one piece of advice for making sure that going into event day, everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, there's no unexpected circumstance, everyone knows exactly their role in executing a good event?
Plan up front. Make sure that everyone knows their role and what's expected of them, and make sure everyone is clear on what success looks like. Okay. If you do those 3 things, and there's a lot of detail underneath that, you will be successful and everyone will be very pleased and everyone will work as a team to get the job done. And that's always the best scenario. I always think the best marketers are ahead of the game. I hate what I call catch-up marketing when sales comes to you and says, oh, we're behind on revenue. What can you do in the last month of the quarter? And I would generally say nothing because I'm thinking next quarter and the quarter out beyond that. Right? If you want something done in the last month of the quarter, that's a sales role, not a marketing role. Okay, so be predictable and be proactive in marketing because you don't want to be in that catch-up phase.
Don't think it has to be any more complicated than that,
No, exactly.
Exactly. Thanks again, Mark. We'll join you next time for our last episode, but looking
Fantastic.
forward to it.
Lawrence, thank you for the discussion. Hope you
No
enjoyed it.
problem. See you next time.
Bye.